Hi everybody, it's Tim from Auto Van Can. It has been a little while, but I got some updates to bring to you. We went to Toolfest last week, so I'm going to be bringing out a video of an updated tour of the work truck. There have been some additions to the work truck. I did weigh myself as well, and it is getting heavy, but we're still within the GVWR, gross vehicle weight rating. But however, today we're going to be changing my wife's rear brake pads on a 2012 Toyota Matrix. She's done about 60,000 kilometers since the last pad and rotor change, and I changed the rear calipers as well. So 60,000 kilometers, times she's worn out the pads within about a year. So we also did some road trips to PEI last year on those brakes too. So like I said, it's time to change the rear brake pads. It looks like we're going to be able to save the rotors, and that's a good thing because there is no street parking come November. So the car's getting stored for the year because we're having baby number 3. So the caravan's staying out. The dad van, yes, is staying out all winter. Now it has been in the body shop for the last month. I should be picking it up today because we are in dire need of it, and baby number 3 is right around the corner. So stay tuned. Let's change some brake pads. As you can see, we're working on my left rear rotor. There is some surface rust. There's a little bit of rot starting to creep in where the pad doesn't sweep around, but generally it's a few brake pad deposits. See this line here and some of the black spots. But as this car's going into storage, you know, hasn't worn into the rotors yet. So these rotors, I'd say, they're still usable until they pulsate. My wife did 60,000 kilometers in just over a year. Hence why, brake people normally do that kind of mileage, within 3 to 4 years, and that's when they look at changing the brakes, and that by that point their brake rotors are no longer reusable. So, but this car's going into storage for about 6 to 8 months over the winter. So I'm gonna keep these rotors, and if there's any little tiny lips, I'm just going to grind them off real quick. So let's get into it. You're going to need a 14 mils up here. And at the bottom for this caliper slide pins. And you do have the evap canister here, so you've got to be careful of this hose. Don't be too... because this hose, as the vehicle gets older, is going to get fragile, and then you'll end up with an engine management light if you break it. If you're fighting your slide pins are rolling around like that, get some slip joint pliers. And just grab the slide pin like that. There you go. We got the slide pin out. Slide pin bolt, sorry. There we go. There's a brake caliper. As you see, these pads were well lubricated and they came out nice and easy. And you could tell the brakes were wearing out because as you reversed, this was vibrating on the brake rotor and it was making a noise. And I love these mechanical squealers. I've got a little pocket pry bar. These are still in good working order, albeit for some surface rust. You can see a little bit of, that's where I was stuck. All the blue grease last time. So it should be the reason why it looks so rusty is this was a new caliper last time, so it's going through its first oxidization. Okay, so look, you could easily reuse these. These rob a lot of power from your impact guns. See if I can get into it. One caliper carrier bolt. Let's put this brake caliper out way. Let's check out these slide pins. We'll clean them up, re-grease them. We'll also take the tiny lip and clean off this piece right here. Clean that up a little bit. All in all, these are good looking brake rotors. So let's get on to cleaning the wheel hub up. First I'm going to be using a right angle snap-on die grinder. Clean up the wheel hub of a little dust, detritus. Apply some fluid film. There's still plenty of anti-seize there from last time on the wheel hub. And if there's a heat shield here, I usually undercoat the heat shield. Next we're going to just take off the small lip on this rotor. We're going to be using, again, die grinder and of course coarse grit, medium grit, roll-lock disc. Next we're just going to give this a quick clean because it's still a pretty new caliper. So I'm going to be using a wire wheel for that on the drill. And to get into these little corners, I use a pocket screwdriver or my pocket pry bar, and I'll just push the dirt out. If this was a really rusty caliper, sometimes I'll use a roll-lock disc and just go across it with the die grinder. So I'll just clean up these corners, re-lube the pins, and she's good to go. Today I'm using a 22 brake caliper rewind set. Rewind tools for left hand and right hand threaded pistons, and a bunch of various adapters that don't really get used that much. You use a select few because it has a lot of European spec vehicles in there, old European spec vehicles in there. You assemble this tool. It has a plate here to go in the caliper. It has a little magnet to stick the adapter on. You will also need a 22mm wrench. Get this in the caliper. You won't know if you have a left or right-handed thread unless you do this vehicle a lot. They can vary from side to side. Typically they have right-handed thread calipers, and then there we go. Now if you can't turn this, something's wrong. Either you got the wrong adapter, the wrong thread, and you're trying to wind the piston out, or your caliper is seized and you're just turning this piston back in. It's on an adjustment spring, so it's important, once you've changed the brakes, just pull on the handbrake a few times, set the adjustment, because they are self-adjusting. There we go. She's wound all the way back in. This is where your 22mm wrench comes in handy. Loosen it off. Now, this is where a lot of people can go wrong. You see, I've got it in the wrong place, because quite often pads will have a detent. Not sure if you can see it on the old pad. They have a little pin here, and if it does not line up with these slots, the pin will sit on here and it will get pushed into the brake rotor and wear unevenly, and then 10-15,000, you're looking at another set of brakes instead of 60k. Now I took the plate out and I'm just going to rotate it back the other way. It's also a good idea to depress your brakes and actuate them once you've done the job, and shine a light in here to make sure that there's no gap. Like, you won't be able to see the pin or anything like that, but as long as there's no gap between the piston and the brake pad, you're good to go. Now on older calipers, this boot will like to stick in place and it'll twist up, and so what I like to do on older calipers is, I'll show you, I get a pick like this. It's got a small curve and a sharp point, and I just go in between, because this is just a weatherproof seal. Not really weatherproof. Dust and dirt and debris. Because if your piston's been out for a long time, you'll still get corrosion, and that's where your piston will seize. And just, I get inside the lip. There's a lip here. Just make sure you don't damage the square seal underneath, the square lip seal, and that's what keeps all the brake fluid in. But if the piston's out, you won't reach it. Just don't poke any holes in the rubber, otherwise you'll get a corroded brake piston. So you stick your clip inside the seal and just work it around the inside, separate it from the rust and corrosion if there's any build up in between. You can also use some rubber care or rubber care products. I use the rubber care by Clean Flow, and I just add some lubrication and just work it around, and that way when you twist the piston in, it's not going to get all bunched up and get its knickers in a twist. Let's get this brake rotor back on. Now, you don't use brake clean on brand new rotors if it says so on the packet. Just let them work off their oil coating. Fully coated rotors aren't coated in oil typically. Or I stick some spring washers on the brake rotor to stop it doing that. I can hold the brake rotor in place, get the caliper on, then go bango bongo. So let's finish cleaning this up. Like I said, just take pocket pry bar. On rusty calipers you'll have to push pretty hard to scour, dig out the insides, because if there's too much corrosion build up on here, your pads aren't going to fit after you've lubed it up and get your shims in. And that's what we're going to do next. We're going to lube it up and put some shims in. And the brakes I'm using today, the brake pads I'm using today, they're premium ceramic disc brake pads. They're available from Benson Auto Parts. They're their own brand. And I've had less comebacks. Occasionally you'll get the noisy set, but that's the same with any manufacturer, but I've had less complaints of noisy brakes with these Titan brake pads than the AC Delcos. Same with their brake rotors. These are the Halton line of brake rotors, and like I said, I've had less warp brake rotors than the AC Delcos. Typically you'll get a replacement set of shims, but if they don't, because not all of the brake pads do, that's why it's important not to bend the old ones as you take them out. And then the brake pads come on a cardboard sheet. Now make sure you get the squealers in the right place by looking at your old pads. And if someone hasn't installed them right, or it's rotted off, typically squealers will go at the back if the caliper's mounted at the back of the caliper, at the bottom. And if the caliper's mounted at the top, you want it so it squeals when the vehicle reverses, not when the vehicle's going forward. So if the vehicle's going backwards, you want the squealer at the top, on the front, on the inside, at the back, at the bottom. Caliper at the front, squealer at the top. Caliper at the back, squealer at the bottom. Sometimes there's different variations in caliper designs, but they use the same brake pad. So sometimes, like in this vehicle, you only need 4 of these shims. I've been supplied 8. So what I use to lube underneath the shims and the backs of the pads is this silicone easy slide. It's blue. It says it can be used on the caliper pistons, not the caliper pistons, sorry, the caliper slide pins, because they are a semi-floating caliper design, but don't. They will gum up and you'll get stuck calipers. So let's give it a little scooch here and there, here and there. This helps prevent corrosion underneath and pushing the shims up into the pads, sticking the pads into place, or at least slows down that process. And then you get pads that are wearing unevenly and wearing out prematurely. So that's why we like the blue grease in there. So as I was talking about the variation difference in the shims, there's the difference there. Here's one set, they've got a gap, and the other set, they don't. Now some vehicles will use a combination. Okay, with the right shims applied, we can now get this caliper bracket, or the adapter plate, back on the vehicle. On this particular vehicle, because those pins are small, it's 46 foot-pounds. Next we're going to use some easy side brake lubricant. I'm just going to squish a little bit into the shims. Now it's time to lube the slide pins. Now if they've been stuck, seized or corroded and you want to replace the pins, I recommend replacing the pins if they're pitted, and then running a wire brush down the bore and cleaning out the bore and replacing the dust bellows and the vibration insulator. But as these are all nice and new, I left it till now. So just going to squish some on there. Make sure you use this. It's a silicone synthetic dielectric grease, silicone based lubricant, and because of its qualities it doesn't swell the vibration insulator. Also, if you clean these with brake clean, make sure you take off the vibration insulator, because if they come in contact with brake cleaner, it swells up. It'll be fine to put in. A couple of months down the road, that bushing will be swollen, and again you'll be getting premature and uneven wearing brake pads. There we go. Now, if it's pushed out too far, you can take some of the air out, pull your thumb across it or use a pick, but don't squish it too hard all the way in. Otherwise it'll have a vacuum in there from where it wants to sit. Then again, premature brake pad wear. So we're going to do this again. Just going to squish the air out. Next we'll be installing the brake pads. These pads do look generic, inside and out, excluding the squealer. Squealer always goes on the inside because you won't be able to install the brake caliper. Now if the pads are different shapes, you can tell inside and outside. Outside pads will have more pad material towards the outside to coincide with these prongs on the caliper piston housing, and the inside pad will have a narrower contact patch on the inside, so it won't be as spread out. So they'll have different surfaces, and then as the brake pad wears, obviously they then become even, but that's all to do with heat, because as the brake pads wear lower, the heat buildup increases because their ability to dissipate heat is reduced, and that's why you get longer stopping distances. So let's just get some gunk on here. Now if you're having a hard time installing these pads, it's not the pad. Some people grind the pad and material off to make it fit. It's the bracket. The bracket needs more material removing. Sometimes these can be a bit of a job to install, especially when they've got the little holes with the springs, and then you need to use a wood clamp to hold them in place as you slide the caliper piston housing on. There we go. Bingo, bango, bongo. This is where I get the blue stuff back out again. I put somewhere caliper piston housing and the piston make contact with the pads, and there we go. And then you've got to make sure that this pin here, the inside pin, is lined up with the pin on the brake pad. Now you won't see it, but once you press the pads in with the wheels off and check, make sure there's no gap between that piston and that brake pad after you've pressed the brakes. If there is, you need to adjust that piston. Also, if the pads are that thick, the new ones are that thick, you won't get that on, not without a fight. Now typically these are around 30 foot-pounds, not 30, 26 foot-pounds, something like that. I usually use calibrated elbow. I'll just gently nip it with the impact gun, because time is money, speed. Now I'll grab some slip joint pliers. You can get thin wrench spanners. I haven't used that word in a long time. Wrenches, and hold them in place, especially if they're moving, but I've never bothered. Just make sure these are good and tight, but not over tight so you stretch the bolt, and that's why I always torque these, the caliper carrier or the adapter. I always torque those bolts, because if you yank on them too tight, you'll stretch the bolt and the caliper will go all weird and the brakes won't feel right, and then you have to order a new bolt from the dealer, unless it's a one-use bolt, torque-to-yield bolt like Porsche's. Obviously your parking brake, actuate it a few times after you, as long as your cables are in working order, and make sure that there's not a larger than ½ mil gap. If there is, readjust your parking brake so there's 4 to 6 clicks, sometimes up to 9. Make sure it's not dragging, as you can turn the brake rotor. And if there is a larger than ½ mil gap and you can't get it to go away, replace the caliper. If your cables are in good working order and you've adjusted the cable on the inside by the handbrake cable. Make sure you don't leave these spring washers on before you put the wheel on, otherwise the wheel, no matter how much you torque it to spec, the wheel will fall off. That's not an if, that's not a but, it will. And there's like not any corrosion here, so no build up. So there we go. That's how you do your rear pads on a car with a parking brake caliper. So if you enjoyed watching this content of me replacing the rear pads and cleaning up the brake rotors on my wife's 2012 Toyota Matrix, then I'd greatly appreciate it if you smash that like button, you comment and you subscribe to the channel. All your input is greatly appreciated, and we'll see you soon.